and welcome back to Franklin Covey's twice weekly podcast on leadership with Scott Miller. That is me. I am privileged to serve as your host twice weekly on Tuesdays and Fridays, where for the better part of 6.5 years and 500 episodes taped and about 450 released, where I have the privilege of interviewing some of the world's most renowned thought leaders, entrepreneurs, academics, intrapreneurs, solopreneurs, wannapreneurs, people that have written best-selling books, celebrities, scientists, geniuses, that all write about different topics, kind of coalescing around how to live your best life, how to become a better leader. In the words of our co-founder, Stephen Covey, how to become more highly effective. FranklinCovey, of course, is the world's most trusted leadership firm based here in Salt Lake City, but with offices around the world. We're dedicated to helping people achieve what is most important to them. Today, my guest is Sara Jane Ho. You may know her as a world-renowned entrepreneur. She has a Netflix program. She has several businesses and has written a book that I'm delighted to bring to you today called Mind Your Manners. Tagline, how to be your best self in any situation. Today, we're going to fix your faux pas. We're going to do a speed round with Sara Jane Ho on a variety of different topics, because unless you have a master's degree in cotillion, which my boys do, maybe you probably can learn a few things today. Sara Jane Ho, welcome to On Leadership.
Thank you, Scott. It's good to be here.
It is great to have you here. Now, you are an expert on social graces and manners and all facets of life, professional and personal. We're going to have a fun time today. We're going to spend the entire time on one giant speed round. So I hope you had some coffee. I know you're joining us from LA today. You split your time between LA and Hong Kong and Shanghai. You have lived and have been raised around the world. Fascinating story on your background. And in fact, to say you are extraordinarily well educated is an understatement, because you've been to some of the finest schools in the world. I would love for you to rewind a couple of years, because being Chinese and living in Hong Kong, you were born in a certain year, and it has some probably influence on your work ethic. Your mother, who has passed, played an enormously influential role in your life and in your inspiration for the book. Before we get into my speed round, would you take a few minutes, literally, and reorient yourself to all of our guests and listeners, many who may know you, recognize you from the Netflix series?
Yeah, I grew up across many different cultures, and I grew up in Hong Kong when it still was a British colony. And then in 1997, there was a handover where it was handed back to mainland China. And as a result, I feel that I'm a product of the East and West, and everything I've done has been to bridge East and West. I went to boarding school, so I went to Phillips Exeter, Georgetown, and then Harvard Business School. And when I graduated in 2012, I moved to Beijing, and I brought the concept of a Swiss finishing school to China. Our students were not children, our students were adult ladies. And then that became a Chinese book of etiquette. That became a Netflix show called Mind Your Manners, which I host. It's a makeover reality show. And then last year I came out with Mind Your Manners, the book. And next month I'm coming out with Mind Your Manners, the podcast.
Honored to have you here. I love how Phillips Exeter and Georgetown and Harvard Business roll off your mouth like, well, I went to Burger King and Subway for lunch at the Olive Garden, meaning like, you know, it's so interesting to see the history you've gone through. You were born in Hong Kong, and you came to the U.S. to be educated. What was it like to be able to attend the finest 3 schools, perhaps, in the nation, if not the world? What was that opportunity like?
Well, when I was younger, because my father, he studied in the UK, and my parents were very focused on the UK track, they expected me to go to an English girls' boarding school in the UK. And that's what my father's bookshelf, it was all English boarding schools. And when I was 14 years old, and around that time, it was 1999, the year 2000 in Hong Kong, there was a shift where families were no longer sending their kids to the UK, but it started to be in vogue to send your child to the US. And when I looked at all the kids that I kind of respected and I thought were cool, they were all going to the US. They were going to St. Paul's, Andover, Deerfield. And I thought, well, I didn't know very much about the US, but I was very intrigued, and I was rebellious. So when you're rebellious, you want to do what your parents don't think for you to do. And I said, I'm going to go to the US. And then I applied and I got in, and the rest is history.
Well, the rest is a lot of hard work. Speaking of hard work, remind our listeners and viewers to what extent there's a correlation between the year you were born in, and that symbol, the Chinese animal, if you will, and your own trajectory in life.
Yeah, I was born in 1985, which is Year of the Ox. And according to Chinese astrology, every birth year animal, they're kind of assigned a personality trait, so to speak. And oxen are known for being very honest and hardworking and loyal. And I'm very, very hardworking.
Well, if you have proved that principle right. Okay, Sara Jane, I want you to buckle up because we're just going to go nonstop for the next 30 minutes. Very excited about it. Have no idea where you're going to take this. I read the book, but have no idea what some of the stories you will tell. Here's what I'm going to ask. All of our listeners and viewers around the world, I'd encourage you just to check into this because you're going to learn some things. You're going to do some things differently as a result of the next 30 minutes. Now, some of these may or may not be customs in your geography or within your culture or religion. But what I love about what Sara teaches is a lot of these are grounded in principles of human behavior, principles of social currency. And no doubt each of us will leave this a little more kind, a little more friendly, and a little more sophisticated. All right. What do you do when you're nervous? No matter the situation, a lot of us, I think, speed up. You have an opposite point of view. What are some tips to remind us we're in a social setting and we're feeling nervous?
Slow down. Slow your movements, slow your speech. Usually when people are nervous and they start being jittery, that gives it away. And when you slow down, you take deep breaths. It's almost like your behavior transforms your inside, and you will calm down, but most importantly, you'll appear calm to other people.
Let's talk about thank you notes. You've come to a dinner party. You were hosted at a cocktail party. Grandparents sent you and your children a gift for Christmas. What's the proper etiquette on thank you notes? Are texts now replacing handwritten thank you notes? What would you say about the general process of thank you notes in 2025?
If you enjoy the act of doing that timeless, handwritten thank you note, power to you. But etiquette also changes with the times. And since the advent of social media, I would say, well, before social media, etiquette would change, I'd say, every generation, 10, 15 years. But now, every 3 to 5 years, etiquette is changing. So absolutely, it's okay in this generation to send a text. I like to wait till the morning after. So if somebody hosted you for a dinner or a cocktail, wait till the next morning before texting them. It shows that you're still thinking about it.
Let's talk about small talk. Someone who perhaps is not good at small talk at a cocktail party, or they want to escape someone who may be dominating the conversation. I loved one of your tips about repeating the last line. Talk about small talk, and what's a good way to escape a conversation that you feel trapped in?
Being a good conversation partner is 80% listening. And when you really properly listen to somebody and then you ask a follow-up question based on what they said, that the other person feels really heard. And so I would say, with small talk, people often get nervous, especially if they're with a client or a boss or somebody who's important, or let's say it's post-COVID, you're feeling a little rusty. Just put yourself into investigative journalist mode, or I like to say student learning mode, where if somebody has a career in something you know nothing about, show interest and think, oh, I don't know much about finance, but could you tell me what part of finance you're doing, or etc. And once you put yourself into student learning mode, any nervousness washes away. Now, if you're stuck with somebody you're trying to get rid of, let's say it's at a group event. The beauty is you're at a group event. So you have other people who you can introduce them to and then let them chat, and then you can slowly and silently walk away. Now, some people will say, oh, that's so inauthentic. Oh, you're pointing them off to someone else. But hey, listen, people come to social events for a reason. They want to meet more people. And you just, from the perspective of the other two, you just did them a favor because you introduced them to somebody new. And at the same time, you freed yourself.
Sara Jane, let's say we find ourselves in a social situation. Maybe it's a corporate event, a cocktail party at a conference, or it's a holiday party somewhere, or at a wedding, and you're standing in a group of, say, 3 or 4 people, and people are conversing, and for whatever reason, you feel the need to remove yourself. Maybe it's because you don't like the group. Maybe 2 people in the group have found a connection and they're dominating. Maybe the conversation isn't where you want it to go. You need to, whatever. What's the best way to recuse yourself from a group that may be 4 or more people and move on somewhere else? Do you acknowledge that you're leaving? Do you say, I'll be back, and you don't return? What's the right way to physically move yourself out of a conversation where you're not the centerpiece?
Well, it's actually much easier to move yourself out of a group conversation than out of a one-on-one conversation, right? Because if you're in a one-on-one, you have to think about, you feel bad about leaving them alone. But if it's a group, it's great. So I usually will just mutter something like, I'll be right back, or I'm going to get a drink, or, oh, I'm going to say hi to the host. And that's all you need to do. You just mutter it. Don't announce it loudly, and don't try to interrupt. Don't try to make that the whole point of the conversation. Just mutter it and leave.
Yeah. To that point, when you're in a one-on-one conversation and you feel the need to remove yourself, you have a great tip that involves listening and repeating. Will you share that with everyone?
Yeah. When you're trying to remove yourself?
Yes, when you're in a one-on-one and you want to remove yourself, you have a great exercise on how to, that involves listening but also repeating something they said.
Yeah. So if, let's say, somebody's talking about a movie and they're going on and you don't feel like speaking with them anymore, I will say something like, yes, that is such a great movie. And you know who you should really meet here, because they really appreciate that kind of movie too, is Ben. Have you met Ben yet? And then bring Ben over, or bring them to Ben, and then that's your introduction for them to meet each other. And then you can exit.
I'm guessing some of these seem a little bit inauthentic or a little maybe mechanized, but the fact of the matter is it's real life and it's reality, and not everybody wants to spend all their time with the same person or the same conversation. I'm guessing you get better with practice. Talk about the need to practice this to have it become more smooth and natural.
Absolutely. I'll say 2 things to that. Firstly, I'm not pretending to be Mother Teresa. I'm not trying to be holier than thou and telling you how you live your life as a good or bad person is up to you. What I'm doing is I'm giving you the tips and tricks to injecting a bit more grace and civility into your interactions. And so I would say I miss manners with a touch of Machiavelli when needed. Now, to answer your question about, sorry, what was the initial question again?
Well, we were talking about it sometimes can feel inauthentic and you need to practice this. It doesn't, you don't do it right the first time. They may feel inauthentic in the beginning, and the more you do this, the easier it's going to be, like with anything.
Yeah, a lot of times people get nervous about, let's say, trying to interrupt a conversation or guide a conversation. A lot of the times people get nervous or they overthink things. And my biggest tip is don't overthink it. Just say it or do it. And with practice, they say practice makes perfect for a reason, right? And listen, we're human. None of us will ever be perfect. But with practice, things become smoother. And so let's say if you're a host and you're hosting a dinner party and somebody's going off kilter on a topic that nobody else is interested in, well, you should actually be in there to then steer the conversation back to something that people are interested in. Now, a lot of people say, oh, but if I try to interrupt or steer that conversation back, that other person might get offended. Like, you're overthinking it. All you need to do is say, yes, that movie is such a great movie. Let's definitely discuss that another time. And then just turn to somebody else at the dinner table and say, John, didn't you go to Burma recently? What is it like over there? And you just have the courage to do it, practice it a few times, and you realize it is so seamless. The only person overthinking it is yourself.
My favorite line in the book is, you teach people how to treat you. Riff on that, because I'm not so sure I'm great at that. What are some tips that everyone needs to instill in their repertoire so that we teach people how to treat us, how we want to be treated?
Yeah. Relationships, whether it's business, life, personal, are all about communication. And you determine the way people treat you. So sometimes you'll have that friend, and every time you meet up with her, she's complaining about how she's a victim, or so and so is being mean to her, or her boyfriend is, not treating her the right way. And okay, I understand that happens every now and then. But if you're finding that it's a pattern, or you're thinking this all the time where you're a victim, it's because you're choosing to be a victim. You're choosing to let your friend treat you that way, or you're choosing to let your boyfriend mistreat you that way. You determine how people treat you. So are you going to put up with it, or are you going to push back and tell them, no, I'm not going to take this. Like, this is not how you speak to me. This is not how you treat me. And it does take self-confidence, which is not something that everybody has. So I would say it's important. Well, first of all, therapy is golden. It really can help with working through a lot of issues that can affect your confidence or lack of confidence today. And secondly, practice. So working through like, okay, that person said something that offended me. What would I do? Or even just Google it, like how to react when somebody insults me, right? And then practicing it to yourself a few times. And then the next time that happens to you, practicing it in real life to another person.
Let's talk about dating. I love this idea. Reference check anyone you are about to be serious with, especially if you're thinking of marrying them. You write, a long-term partnership or long-term relationship is like a business partnership. Not until I was 36 did I finally have my lawyer do a business background check and a friend do a reputational background check on the man who is now my husband. And you said it was right before you visited his hometown. Maybe teach some lessons through how you also background checked your now husband.
Yeah. Reference checks. So for employers hiring staff, the most valuable thing you can do is a reference check. And we all do it, right? It's like on your resume, you need to have your reference, and then the job you're applying for, right? The person says, okay, I'm going to be calling you references, and they do. How come we aren't doing that in a lot of our personal relationships? It could save us a lot of time, valuable time, and heartache. So in my 20s when I dated and I just I didn't care to do reputation checks or to ask around, I found myself being in relationships where, we had common friends, or maybe I even knew their previous partners, but I didn't have the guts to find out or to ask like really what happened, because if you're with a guy, he's not going to go tell you his side of the story, right? And he'll almost always make the ex out to be crazy. And then after time goes by, you realize, maybe she's not so crazy, maybe it's him. And you could have saved yourself years. So reputation checks are when, let's say, if you have friends in common, right? Or you see, you have friends on Facebook or Instagram, then just to ask around, be like, hey, I just started, and obviously you want to ask like good friends of yours, or just say, I'm just starting to date this person. I see you're a mutual friend. Like, do you think he's a good guy? Like, what do you know about him? That's actually completely valid. Now, the reason I did a background legal check is because I lived in China at the time, and I was tired of, in China, you can't do a Google search. You can't do a LinkedIn. You don't see all your 30 mutual friends from college on Instagram or Facebook. A lot of people have the same name. Like if you're dating somebody called Wang Xing, there are like thousands of people called Wang Xing. And so I realized very early on, not just doing business, but also dating in China, that a lot of things are not as they seem. And things are not very transparent, which is why it was even more important for me to do a reputation check and a legal check. But also at that point, I was 35, 36 years old. And I thought like, I'm looking for a long-term partner. I'm not just dating just to date anymore. And you know what? When my husband actually found out I did it, he respected me all the more for it.
I think the principle of things are not as they seem is now universal, not just in China for that matter. But I always encourage my friends, oh my gosh, you should definitely do a credit check. And you should do a legal check. Have they been arrested? Have they been, what's their criminal history? What is their financial history? There's no question about that. Okay, let's go fast on the speed round. Weddings. When you are attending a wedding as a guest, what are the 2 or 3 things people need to be mindful of to make sure that they behave properly as a guest?
Firstly, never wear white. And it's better to stick to pastel colors, so sort of light, bright pastel colors. Secondly, don't get drunk at the wedding. You'll probably end up doing something you regret. And you don't want to be sloppy, right, at your friend's wedding. And thirdly, if you are making a speech, don't ramble on and on. There's nothing worse than when there's a bridesmaid or a best friend or whatever speech that just doesn't end.
Oh, I once was a best man and I gave like a 15-minute presentation at the toast. It was horrible. Oh my gosh. It was like at a Four Seasons hotel. I taught concepts. It was horrible. It was beautiful for a professional workshop, but where were you 20 years ago? How about when you're hosting a wedding? Whether you're the bride or the groom or the parents, are there some things that we lose track of in the midst of being our party or whatever it is to make sure it's a lovely affair for the guest? Maybe first of all, whose wedding is it and who matters the most? And what are some things people need to be reminded of when they're hosting a wedding?
Yeah, there are so many couples I've spoken to who said that when it came, they maybe dated for 7 years and they never had like a big argument or they never had a breakup, and then they start planning their wedding and then they almost break up. I think it's important to have perspective. There's a statistic that says the bigger the wedding, the shorter the marriage. So if you're the bride, yes, it's your big day, but don't be a bridezilla and don't sacrifice your relationship over, being a bridezilla for your wedding. Secondly, I would say it's really important if you have single friends to matchmake them. And so make sure that if you have some single guy friends and some single girlfriends, think about, I could be a matchmaker here and see them next to each other. Because in a time where everything is on the apps, right? Dating's all on the apps now. Weddings are kind of our last great in-person opportunity to meet somebody. And you want to have that good energy, like that positive energy of, it's your wedding, but you're also like matchmaking people. And then thirdly, I would say don't sweat the small stuff. Nothing will go 100% as planned, but it's important just to have perspective and enjoy the wedding.
Let's talk about funerals. I'm not sure you talk about funerals in the book, but as a guest at a wake or a viewing or a funeral, are there any watch outs you would give attendees to say, don't do this, don't ask that, don't say this, instead consider this?
For a funeral, you should just be as inconspicuous as possible. Don't try to draw attention to yourself in any way. You are there in order to provide your condolences to the family and offer up assistance in any way you can. So anything outside of that doesn't need to be done.
Social media. What are some of your social reminders around how to behave and build your reputation on social media?
When you post on social media to the public, you are putting yourself out there. And one tip that my dad taught me early on is the concept of yin and yang. When there's yin, there is yang. When people like you, there will be people who dislike you. And some people will take some things out of context or take it the wrong way. And if you ever get left negative or critical comments, the best thing is to ignore them. The worst thing you can do, and the way to shoot yourself in the foot, is to start arguing with strangers in your comment section, which will only open you up to being exposed more and possibly getting canceled.
So I'm going to give you a real life situation. I have a fairly prominent profile here in the US as an author and a podcast host and an agent of others. I posted a couple of days ago that I decided to have a champagne-free January. The only alcohol I consume is champagne, quite prolifically, but very responsibly. And we have a lot of entertaining events in our house and fundraisers and parties and things like that. And so I just decided that I was going to not drink champagne in January, more because my wife and I are raising 3 young boys, and we want to teach them that, we drink responsibly, we don't drink as a habit, it's a social activity. Our boys have never seen us intoxicated. And so I posted just something innocuous on my social that we were having a champagne-free January, 13 days down, 28 days to go, or whatever it was. And I had someone who actually I attend the same religious institution with say to me in a kind of a trollish fashion, well, what is it you're trying to approve by just giving up alcohol for a month? And I thought about it, and I'm pretty good at not taking the bait. I happen to know this person, I believe, is a recovering abuser of alcohol, but that's her business and not mine to share. And she used the word, what are you trying to prove? And I'm pretty good about not taking the bait. On this one, I fell down, and I simply said, you know what? I'm not trying to prove anything. I'm just an energy infuser. I'm not an energy depleter, and I'm just sharing that. There was a picture of my mother-in-law drinking iced tea and our champagne flutes. It was kind of a funny thing. And I made the mistake of responding to her, is it a general rule of yours, do not engage the negativity and the troll? Like never, 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 never.
Yeah, just ignore it. I mean, as soon as you give energy to it, you give power to it. And the biggest power you can have is a power of indifference.
Yes.
Right? People think that the opposite
Yes.
of love is to hate. It's not. The opposite of love is indifference. You don't even care. And so
I love that.
for me, and of course, like, if you go to any of the Kardashians' Instagrams, it's full of hate. Do they say anything? They say nothing.
Yes, yeah, well said. I saw a social post recently attributed to David Beckham. Who knows now if that was true, but it said the people who dislike you the most are also those who watch you the most. And it was a really good point to remember. Okay, let's talk about hosting a dinner party or some kind of cocktail party. What are the 2 or 3 or 4 things that the host needs to remember?
The most important thing when you host a dinner party is table conversation. So, of course, everybody says, yes, you have to have the ambiance, the music, the mood lighting, plan the menu. But if table conversation falls flat, no one will have had a good time. Think back to some of the best meals you've had. Maybe you were at a hole in the wall or some tiny little restaurant in like the West Village or wherever, right? But if the table conversation was so good, there was sparks and chemistry and people debating and laughing. Even if the food wasn't that great, you walk away thinking, wow, that was such a great dinner. So table conversation is the most important thing. Now you're probably thinking, how do I make sure there's good table conversation? Well, table seating is the first thing. You want to mix people up, right? So if they're couples that have been married for over a year, if they're people in the same industry, if they're like besties or gender, you want diverse. If you have quiet people, you want to intersperse them with, extroverts, so introverts and extroverts, so that extroverts can take care of the introverts, right? You want a well-balanced table. That's number one. Secondly, you as a host should be speaking the least about yourself, but you should be almost like an orchestrator. And so you should be, if you notice somebody speaking less or they seem to be left out or they're quiet, then you should be drawing them out of their shell. I always say I see every guest or every person like a flower. A flower bud. You need to, through conversation and asking them open questions, help them blossom.
As the host, if someone is either intoxicated or decides to go off on a political tirade, is it your responsibility to, solve that, mediate that? What's your role without trying to manage the situation?
Yeah, that's always a tricky one when somebody is completely drunk and they're starting to misbehave at your event. What you do is you find the person's closest to them. So what you do is you find the person closest to them, for example, their partner, or if they came alone, you find your friend closest to you, right? Maybe a guy or girlfriend who you're closest with, and say, can you please help me take them home?
Yeah, so at the end of the day, it is your responsibility to step in and find a solution for the situation, clearly.
Yes.
Yeah. How about if you're a dinner party guest? Do you always bring a housewarming gift? Do you, can you bring a guest? Can you ask, can I bring a +1? You talk about in your book what you do if you've got someone who's staying with you and you've got an invitation. Talk about the best way to add value as a dinner party guest.
Yeah, well, you should definitely bring something. You never want to show up empty-handed. If you bring flowers, it's actually better to have them sent in that morning. so that the hostess has time to pot them, to arrange them. Usually if you show up with flowers, when you show up, the host is at their most busiest and stressed. So the last thing they want to do is like cut the flowers and then find a vase and fill it with water and then put it in, right? That's actually added stress. So either send flowers the morning of, or bring a flower that can just easily, like an orchid, that can just be put there, or bring something that could be shared at the meal. So whether it's beautiful chocolates or a lovely dessert that can be part of the meal for everybody to experience, or just something very thoughtful for the host. Now, so what was the other part of that question?
Well, it's just what happens if you have an invite to come to a party and maybe you're not sure if you can bring a +1 or not, or you have a guest at your house. What's the best way to, because listen, if we're having a dinner party and someone says, can I bring a guest? My answer is always yes, unless, I have seating for 10, I can't fit 11, but I will do my best to accommodate what is sometimes, I don't want to say rude, but I'm thinking, seriously? It's a dinner party. We're having it catered. It's a sit down. It's a plated meal. No, you can't bring someone, but I always say yes because I feel like they don't know enough not to ask me that, so at least I'm going to be a gracious host and say, of course you could bring someone, and then I frantically reset the table or put people at the bar or move it around so that I don't seem like I'm too rigid and maybe I'm just a pushover.
Yeah, the best way if you're invited to a meal and you would like to bring someone is, just ask, just to say, and listen, you don't want to bring someone random. Like, don't bring the Tinder date that you just met yesterday, right? It should be your spouse or a long-term partner, a more serious partner, or maybe if it's a guest staying with you and you feel bad leaving your guest alone, you can say to the host, is it okay if I bring and then just say long-term girlfriend or friend who's staying with me, but also talk up that person, right? To say, I think you'd really enjoy meeting her. She's very impressive, or she does this, or you have similar hobbies. But then you always want to end it by saying, I also realize I'm imposing, so I completely understand. I haven't asked that person yet, so I understand if there's no capacity, right?
I think in your book, you emphasize how important it is to say, I have not yet asked that person yet, so that the host, if they really do need to decline, they know that it's not going to be awkward for you to say no or not to ask.
Exactly.
Yeah. Let's talk about dining. What are the major faux pas people have at business dinners and restaurants, at cocktail parties or bars? Some things we should remember to do that a lot of people forget or don't know.
Yeah, it's funny, just on today I posted on X, there was a BBC article that talks about how J.D. Vance's wife taught him how to use cutlery at a formal meal, and that you should work it from the outside in. They reference his memoir, and she did it so that he could be more confident at the dinner table. So, and now he's obviously vice president-elect. So it is something that does come in handy for everybody, no matter who you are, just to know what to do with cutlery to be more confident. I would say that usually when you go to a restaurant, the first thing you should do is put the napkin on your lap. That's number one. As soon as your bum touches the chair, put your napkin on your lap. And then secondly, with cutlery, when you're finished with your cutlery, you always put them onto the plate and sort of, side by side like this. And, in sort of like in the 6:30 position. And that's a sign to the waiter that you're finished with your meal and that they can remove your plate.
Talk about items on the table. When, if ever, when you're finished, would you put your napkin on your plate or a sugar packet? And say you're not at a fine dining restaurant, but you're at a restaurant where there are some things. Do you gather your stuff together? Do you ever stack? I know the answer, but do you stack your plates? Tell people that may not have been raised on the East Coast like I did, where my parents forced me into multiple years of cotillion training, which I'm grateful for, and we did it with our sons as well. When do you do any organizing or cleanup, and where does your napkin go when you are finished eating?
Yeah, your napkin should never go on your plate because your plate is dirty and greasy, and the last thing you want to do is put your cloth napkin on that. When you're finished with your meal, your knife and fork go on top of the plate in that 6:30 position, and then you take your napkin off your lap and you put it to the right-hand side of the plate. And that means I'm done with my meal, I'm leaving. You only do that when you actually leave the table for good.
When you leave the table. So if you've had your dinner, you've had your dessert, and you're done, and they take your plate, you do not put your napkin on the table until you are standing up and you're leaving the table once and for all.
Correct. And if, let's say, you have to leave the table intermittently to use the restroom or to make a phone call, but you're going to come back, then you put your napkin on the chair where your seat was. Because that shows, like, I'm still going to come back. Don't take my seat.
Someone invites you to lunch. It's a casual friend, business colleague. The check comes. They invite you, hey, do you want to go to that Italian restaurant for lunch? I haven't seen you in 3 months. How do you handle the check? Do you always split the check? Do you expect the person that initiated the invitation to pay the bill? What if someone the check comes and it's awkward and that person says, oh, let me get it? How do you deal with that?
But when the check comes, there's always a period of awkwardness. And you just have to go with the flow. I always offer, I always reach for my purse. And because the thing is, there is no right or wrong, it depends on context. Even within different parts of the states, right? If you're in the South, then where values are a bit more conservative, even if you're with a male platonic friend, he will likely pick up the bill. But if you're in California, even if you're dating someone, they may expect you to split the bill. So I always offer because you don't want to take anything for granted, and then just see how the other person responds. It is a bit of a dance. Now in Asian countries, usually the person who invited is the one who treats, and in countries which are a bit more traditional, like for example, Middle Eastern countries, Asian countries, South American countries, Latin countries, they will, similar to sort of the Deep South or the South in the US, men will usually not let women pay.
Your book is extraordinary. I mean, everything from all the things that a bad guest does versus a good guest does at a dinner party or staying over, how to handle communicating dietary restrictions. I love the part, and let's finish with this, about how to introduce yourself or others in situations. Would you take the last few minutes, Sara Jane, and just talk about, when it comes to introductions, what is the best way to introduce yourself to someone, or for that matter, other people to other people where you may have similar or different knowledge and relationships with? To kind of work through a couple of those scenarios, and we'll let you go.
It's called working a room, right? So when you think of a great host or a great hostess, they know how to work a room, not just for themselves, but for other people. And for me, when I'm hosting, I'm always moving people around. I'm always, if I see, let's say it's a cocktail, I'm calling people over to come here to meet somebody, sending someone over there to meet somebody else. And it's because I see a common link, or I know that one of them would be interested in meeting one of the other person. And I don't just say, oh, here's Jen, here's Sam. I say, hey, Jen, this is Sam. Sam is, a very successful producer. Do you know that he produced XYZ movie? Da, da, da. And I say, oh, Jen is actually she's a very accomplished musician. She performed on stage with Yo-Yo Ma, something like that. And you want to sell your friends. You want to put them in the best possible light, show them the best possible light, which makes other people interested in them and forming connections with them.
Sara Jane, icebreaker. You're at a cocktail party, you're at any kind of event, and whatever the circumstance is, you end up coming up to another person and you're introducing yourself to them. What's the best icebreaker? I mean, what's the best question to ask? In America, it's always, so what do you do? When people ask me that, I say a lot, primarily raising 3 gentlemen, but what's the best way? I know culturally it's different. What's the best way to start a conversation without it always being around, what do you do for a living? Which I get is probably more Western-centric maybe than the rest of the world, maybe not. Walk us through that.
Yeah, I think what do you do is very New York-centric. Because I have friends from other parts of the U.S. who say, who complain, New Yorkers only ask what you do. But again, there is no right or wrong, right? It's just contextual. And I love an icebreaker where you're complimenting somebody. So even just the other day in the gym in my building, there was a girl who was lifting herself up on a bar, and she had like a 30-pound dumbbell that she was gripping with her feet at the same time. So she wasn't just doing like lift ups, she was doing them along with like a really heavy weight in between her feet. And I was just running on the treadmill, but I called out, I was like, that's impressive. And I was like, I've never seen anybody do that before. That's really cool. And we just struck up a conversation, and she just moved into my building. So, one thing is to not do a formal self-intro straight away, but to just kind of act as though you're already friends, and then just compliment them and pick up an easy conversation, right? That's kind of like the nicest way. And then after you converse enough, you say, by the way, I'm Sara Jane, I live, here, or I moved in here, or, by the way, what's your name? And then it just feels a bit more natural and smooth. Etiquette is really just about injecting a bit of grace and civility and timeless values into our human interactions.
Sara Jane Ho, your book is Mind Your Manners. You host the Netflix series by the same name, How to Be Your Best Self in Any Situation. This could have been a 4-hour mastermind, because I think, especially post-pandemic, especially in a world where the coming generation into the workforce and society has probably had less circumstance to develop their interpersonal skills, their physical presence, their confidence. They live in more of a virtual world. That's not all bad, that's not all good. But one of the things that my wife and I have done is to constantly put our sons in social situations so they know how to extend their hand, how to greet people, when and where to walk in or walk out, and who enters first and not. And I think this will serve him well. I strongly encourage everyone who is watching this, buy this book. And buy this book for your children and talk about it. Don't shame them into it. Say, oh my gosh, I've learned so many things that I have done wrong. Did you read page 74? Did you read page 85? You will learn so much, not just about how to facilitate conversation in your own group, but how to behave in a more global world. Because obviously, a lot of these are principles, but there are nuances around the world. And having lived around the world, Sara Jane brings a lot of those insights. Sara Jane Ho, thank you for your time today. Love your book, love your program. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you, Scott.
And we'll see you back here next week for a new, more civilized conversation on leadership.